looked at insecurities. And we filled in the blank. I'm never blank enough. And so for me, I thought, you know what, I'm never experienced enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not skilled enough. There's no way I can lead well enough. And so why would people listen? And then we looked and said, well, what does God have to say? How does God view us? And how our view of God is a direct relation of how we view others and how we view ourselves. And so God says, I am. He says we're dearly loved, we're chosen, we're redeemed, we're forgiven. Then last week we looked at fears. How do those lies come up in the fears that we have on a daily basis show up with the question, what if? What if I fail? What if I don't get promoted? What if I can't provide? What if my family won't change? And we looked and we said, well, if we got to play out those fears and we got to play them out all the way through, at the bottom, at the core of that, we're going to find that God says He will. He will be there and He'll be able to provide, and that He will renew our strength. And so I opened up with a story of fear last week, and I realized I never finished it. So I came across a rhino when I was out in Kenya. We were on a safari, and we came across a rhino. And our goal was to go see a lion. And so as we were out there, we ran into this rhino, and we had a back-and-forth battle of who's going to charge who, and should we just turn around and go the other way. But eventually we passed by the rhino, and we're still on this hunt for a lion. So we finally pulled up around this corner, and we see this open field, and we see this ginormous male lion about 100 yards away. And he's just laying there, chilling, minding his own business. And then a bird, kind of like a blue heron, comes flying down and lands too close to him. And he just lets out this roar that gave us chills being 100 yards away. And so we did finally get to see a lion. And so I wanted to finish off that story with you guys. So I kind of left you hanging last week. But this week, what we're looking at the chatterbox of discouragement. And so what does that look like? God says I can. What's the promise that God says I can of overpowering the lies of my discouragement? So what I want to do, I want to share a little bit of my life with you and how I was discouraged and how this affected me. And then be able to look at Scripture and see how this plays into even a strong and huge leader who helped lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And so for me, over this past year, I was in a place of discouragement where I felt like, you know what, it doesn't matter. What I'm doing really doesn't matter. You know what, they're not going to listen. The people that I'm leading, it's tough, it's struggling, so why do I keep doing it? I'm wanting to look at my best friend and say, will you marry me? And so I'm looking at the job that I'm at, and I'm like, I can't raise up enough money to do that, so I need to go look for another job. So I go and get another job, and as I'm at this other job, I'm doing both jobs. I'm like, well, the thing that I really want to do is ministry. I want to keep hanging out and be able to invest my life into that, but I can't because I'm pulled. I need to provide and be able to say, will you marry me? So I'm at this other job, and every time I'm at this other job, I'm getting discouraged because I go, the thing that I want to do, I can't do. But the thing that I want to do is propose, and I can't do that by just keeping this job. So I'm in this place, in this rock between this hard place of I have to have two jobs going. It's not really working. I'm struggling. I'm getting discouraged. And then the thing that kept hitting me was, wow, Keith, you're never going to get out of that. Why do you keep trying? You're just kind of in this place of discouragement. Why do you keep doing what you're doing? I'm 25 years old. I'm looking. I'm like, man, I'm living at someone's basement. A guy in the church has been so gracious. He's let me live in his basement to be able to save some money. And I'm looking. I'm like, man, I'm a 25-year-old man who literally can't even have his own apartment, having to work two jobs. I'm discouraged. It's not working. I'm just stuck. One of the coolest things was Charlie introduced me to this book called Crash the Chatterboxes. And so it's by a pastor by the name of Stephen Furtick, a guy that I really love and respect. And I started processing through this book with her. And so most of the principles come out of this book, but Satan will use a tactic to be able to kind of deafen God's voice so we can't accurately or actively hear his voice through discouragement. And so this showed up in my life in a real way over this past year. And so it's a burden that I have that I want to share with you guys. But we kind of come to these places as well. Some of us may be discouraged right now, but some of us may just feel at times in our life that we have been discouraged. We've reached a place where we ask the question, what's the point? What's the point? What do I keep doing? I keep going to work. I keep doing two different jobs. I keep battling, but I'm basically waking up thinking, what's the point? It's not working. What's the point? So I kept wrestling, and so each morning I would wake up and I would kind of ask this question, what's the point? Should I keep doing this? Should I go out and look for another job? Do I want to stay in ministry? What in the world? There's discouraging times where not everyone listens to you. You might not even know what you're doing is the right thing to do, and so you kind of sit there and you're thinking, well, what's the point? Why do I keep doing this? So many of us can feel that as well. We come to the place of asking the question, what's the point? Many of us are able to be friends or we're family members, and so we kind of ask the question, what's the point? Do I keep investing my life? Do I keep trying to pour into them, the ones that I love? But there's no progress. There's nothing changing. What's the point? We look and we say, well, others aren't struggling like I am. I'm working really, really hard, and it seems like everyone else has their act together. What's the point? It's not working for me. I look around and I see, it's not working. I'm somehow kind of messed up. I can't figure it out, but everyone else has it figured out. Nothing I say will stick. So why do I keep sharing stuff with them? Why would I try to encourage? Why do I keep trying to help out? Why do I offer myself to them when it's not going to work? Nothing has changed. What's the point? And we come to a place of discouragement. And there's a quote by the pastor, Stephen Furtick. He said this, and it's been huge in my life. The closer we get to God, the louder the chatter becomes. The closer we get to God, the louder the chatter becomes, because as we try to grow closer to God, He's going to make these voices and these lies louder and louder, whether it's through our insecurities, whether it's through our fears, or whether it's in a place of discouragement. He wants to do everything He can to be able to keep us from accurately and actively hearing God's voice. So He's going to send some different tactics. And this one is discouragement. And so this is how it played up in mine, but we kind of get to the place and we just ask this question, what's the point? Does it even matter? So I don't know if you're there or if you've been to a place like that, but I was at this place of what's the point? It doesn't matter. I'm working 2 jobs, barely scraping by. I'm living in a guy's basement. What's the point? All of my friends who have gone into ministry are doing better than I am. They're buying houses. They're having kids. What's the point? What's wrong with you, Keith? Discouragement. And so these lies start coming in. They filter through the insecurities. They go into the fears. Well, what if it doesn't change? What if it doesn't get better? And then the discouragement settles in. What does that look like? So I really appreciated the life of Moses. And so in the book of Exodus, that's where we're going to look for most of our time together. But the book of Exodus, we're going to look at chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. And we're going to see Moses, a man who is leading a nation of millions of people. He's at this place of discouragement. He reached discouragement, and here's where we jump into the story. He's supposed to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, and we read in Exodus chapter 6, verses 10 through 12. Here's what it says. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of his country." But Moses said to the Lord, "If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips?" Moses is talking back to God. God saying, look, Moses, I've called you. You're the person I want. I want you to go lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So just go talk to Pharaoh on my behalf. Just simply say, let my people go. Moses is at this place of discouragement, and he looks and he talks back to God, and he says this, what's the point? Why would I do that? Because your people won't even listen to me, so why would I go to a person who is guaranteed not going to listen to me? What's the point? Why would I keep trying? It's not working. Moses reaches a point of discouragement. He found himself discouraged, but how in the world did Moses reach that place? How did Moses find himself here in chapter 6, discouraged, telling God, what's the point? Asking the question, why do I keep doing it? Why would you want me to go? So we get to look back. In Exodus chapter 3, we're going to see how discouragement comes in. And here's what discouragement is. Discouragement comes when my disappointed expectations are full grown. Discouragement comes when my disappointed expectations are full grown. So we have to look and see, what are the expectations that I have? What are the expectations that Moses had? In my life, I'm thinking, I'm expected. I'm just assuming, I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to be able to have a job, whether it's in ministry or not, but I'll be able to have a job where I can live and I can follow God. And you know what, that life is going to be able to to be able to provide for my needs. I'm expecting that to take place. I'm expecting that my life is going to matter, that I'm going to make a difference. And so what I'm experiencing then, I'm reaching this disappointment. I'm seeing it's not really playing out the way that I thought, the way that I intended. And so it's at a place of discouragement. And here's where we pick up with Moses. Discouragement comes when my disappointed expectations are full grown. So what are the expectations that Moses had? In Exodus chapter 3, here's where we pick up the story. God's basically just supernaturally called Moses out. Moses was in a desert. He's kind of wandering in his own way. He used to be in the house of Pharaoh. He ends up murdering a guy, and so then he runs. And as he's running, he flees to this desert, and he's basically camping out, waiting for the people who saw and know that he killed this guy to die off. So Moses is here. God calls him out, and he says, Moses, I have a purpose for you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go free my people. I've heard their cries. They're enslaved. I've heard them. I want to free them. I want to bring them freedom. I want them to be able to go to a nation that I've called out for them. So he's already called Moses out, and here's what he tells Moses. He's saying, basically, Moses, here's what you can expect. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 18, it reads this. The Lord is talking to Moses, and he says, the elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not listen. He will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So Moses has been told, here's what's to expect. Here's what you're to do. You're to go. Gather the elders of the Israelites and tell them God wants us to go on a 3-day journey to go worship him. They will listen, and then you guys together can go to Pharaoh, and you guys can present that to Pharaoh. And you know what? Pharaoh's already going to harden his heart. He's not going to want to do it, but a mighty hand will compel him. So if I'm Moses and I hear that, here's my expectation. Okay, Israel is going to listen. It's going to be a challenge to get Pharaoh, but a mighty hand is going to compel him to. Moses goes through some of these chatterboxes. He's insecure. He's telling God, I'm not the guy. I don't know what it is, but I'm not blank enough. There's no way they'll listen. He goes through these fears, these chatterboxes, these lies that have been bombarding his mind. What if they don't listen, Moses? What if they don't follow you? And Moses finally starts breaking ground through these chatterboxes, through these lies, and Satan pumps the volume up a little bit. He wants him to get discouraged. So he's having him hang on to some expectations, and what he's going to experience is something totally different. Through his insecurities, he feels like he doesn't have any way of speaking to the Israelites. He's not capable of doing it. He has some speech impediment or some sort of disability where he can't talk well. God provides a messenger. He gives him Aaron. He goes, you and Aaron now go. Aaron will speak the words for you. So him and Aaron go, and here's what we read in Exodus 4, verse 29. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites. So they're doing what God's told them to do. Bring all the elders together. Here's what they're doing. They bring them together, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. One of the questions Moses had was, how are they going to know I'm coming from you, God? How are they going to know? He gives him some miracles. Perform these signs, and they're going to see that it's definitely from me. They'll be convinced that I sent you. He wrestles through that. Well, what if they don't listen? What if it doesn't work? God says, go. Moses obeys, and he still is hanging on to this expectation. The people will listen. Pharaoh's going to harden his heart, but I will free the Israelites. He goes and does the first thing with Aaron. He goes and he says, okay, I'm obedient. I'm going to expect that you're going to show up. Guess what? They listen. The Israelites listen, and they begin to worship God. How in the world did Moses get to a place of discouragement? He just saw the Israelites listen. There was a gap between what he expected and what Moses was experiencing. And this gap is played out in Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5, Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh. And they say, hey, look, we're coming from God. The Israelites, they're a people of God. And he wants us to ask you to let us go, to be able to go into the desert and worship God on a 3-day journey. We're asking for 3 days off of work. And Pharaoh looks and he says, if you go and you take all these people, who's going to do the work? There's this gap here. Who's going to do the work? And Moses goes, we just need 3 days. That's all I'm asking for is 3 days. We're going to get away from work, and we're going to go and worship God, and then we'll come back. Pharaoh says no. He hardens his heart. He believes in his heart that what they're trying to do is they're just trying to get a break because they're lazy. So they had this quota. They had to make so many bricks a day. And Pharaoh would provide the straw, and then the Israelites, the slaves there, would actually make the bricks by hand. And Pharaoh looks and he says, since you're being so lazy, I'm actually going to keep that quota up. You're going to have to meet that quota of bricks per day. But I'm now no longer going to provide the straw. You guys are going to have to go out in the fields. You're going to have to find the straw. You're going to have to harvest it. You're going to have to bring it back. But the quota is still the quota. You're going to have to reach that. So the Israelites are devastated. They're working really, really hard. And they're getting beaten because they can't meet this quota. And the elders get so furious, they go to Pharaoh. And here's where we pick up the story in verses 15. Exodus 5, verse 15 through 23, here's what it says. The Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told, make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. Pharaoh said, lazy. That's what you are, lazy. That's why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get back to work. You will not be given any straw. You must produce your full quota of bricks. The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told, you are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron. Now, I could just picture this. If I'm one of those elders and I go to Pharaoh, the king over Egypt, and he tells me to get back to work, basically the guys that you have who have been talking to me, I'm just thinking they're lazy. If I'm one of those elders, I'm like headhunting for Moses and Aaron. I'm going to seek them out because whatever they're saying to Pharaoh, he's making our life miserable. He's making it a lot harder. So I'm going to go seek them out. And this is what we find. They find Moses and Aaron, and here's what they say. May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. This whole thing that God told you to do, it's not working. We're discouraged. What's the point? Why are you going and saying this? Just leave us alone, basically. Stop going on our behalf. We're not following you. Just stop. You're making our life hard. You're making it even worse. Discouragement likes to come up when our expectations, when we're disappointed in the expectations. Moses here had this expectation. The Israelites are going to believe you. They're going to listen. They're going to follow you. And what he's experiencing is the complete opposite. It doesn't look like they're following me, God. They just told me to stop. They don't want to listen. They actually asked me basically to stop going before Pharaoh. So the message that you want me to share, it's not working. And I don't even think you care. Why in the world would you send me? You want me to go back and talk to Pharaoh? Why would I do that when the expectation I have of the Israelites listening is not something that I'm experiencing? So when I'm in this season of discouragement, I'm asking this question, what's the point? God, why in the world would you call me to Akron, Ohio, the place I did not want to go? When I was in college, I remember my friend asking me, where would you not want to go? I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I went to school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I drove the turnpike 76 and 80 the whole way. And I told him, I said, I don't want to go anywhere between here, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And God put me like almost right in the middle. So my family laughs. They're like, Keith, you're the bed and breakfast, so anytime we travel through, we have a place to stay. We just make a halfway journey. And And I'm discouraged, and what started to eat at me was these voices got louder. Keith, you know your family, they get to hang out with each other a lot. You know, you don't even get a chance to go see them. You really don't get to spend quality time with them. And this hit at a core for me when I'm number 3 of 4 boys. I don't know how my mom survived. I really don't. But anyways, we're all grown now, and the second oldest, his name's Kevin. He's married, and they had a kid in November. And I remember the family's like, oh, we're all going out to see Kevin. My parents are flying in from Milwaukee. My brothers are in the area, and so they all come down, and they're hanging out with Kevin and the family. The birth of their son, Hollis, comes, and everyone's there. I'm getting all these pictures, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really great. Like, I'm really excited the baby's healthy. They finally had him. And then discouragement hit in. These voices got louder. Keith, wow. You know, the expectation would be you get to take off of work and be with family during crucial times of life. And what you're experiencing, even if the church let you off, and they're so gracious they would do it, the place you're working at, the second job, you can't because you have to almost have 2 schedules. So you literally can't get off work to go see them. What you're experiencing is no freedom. There's no way that you can go spend crucial time with family. So what I'm expecting is to be able to be there and show up for family. Yet what I'm experiencing is I'm the only one of the family gone, and discouragement gets louder. Satan starts pumping in these voices, these lies. Keith, you're not doing anything really. Like, you're struggling with 2 different jobs. You're not making an impact. You can't even spend time with family. What's the point? It's not working. You know what? You should just give up, because obviously ministry is really hard. That's the thing holding you back. Well, if I give up on ministry, now what? Well, Keith, don't worry about it. You know what? You'll figure it out. You have a couple degrees. You can figure it out. And so these lies start going. Well, what does God want? My best friend, Charlie, actually mentioned this to me. She said this. She goes, Keith, could it be that God, that He is preparing you now for something later? So in this season of discouragement, could it be that He's preparing you now for something later? That blew my mind. I'm thinking, I'm in the middle of this discouragement. I really don't want to figure this out. It's easier probably just to walk away and go do my own thing. I'm discouraged. And she goes, could it be that He's preparing you now during this season of discouragement for something later? At the point, or at the time, I'm thinking, I don't want to hear that. But it was so crucial that I heard it. I thought, okay, great, yeah, thanks for the wisdom. It actually rocked my world, because she's right. Could it be that He's preparing you now for something later? And we see this played out in the life of Moses. So Moses, in this season of discouragement, when the Israelites won't even listen to him, so why in the world would he go to Pharaoh? We get to see this played out later on in Exodus. Exodus chapter 14. You don't have to turn there, I'll read it. Basically, after a couple of events happen, God performs some miracles where He shows Pharaoh, you know what, you cannot hang on to my people, and He lets them go. So now they're on this journey, and they're actually not going for a 3-day journey. They're gone. They're leaving for good, and they camp out in this place, and right by the place they're camping out is this large sea, and there's no way they're going to get around it. And what ends up happening is Pharaoh changes his mind. We would see through the story that Pharaoh would promise deliverance of the Israelites, and then he would change his mind over and over again. So he finally lets them go, and they've been gone for a little bit, and he changes his mind. He says, I want them back. So he gets his troops, and he starts to go after them. And then here's where we pick up the story of Exodus 14:11 through 14. Says this. The Pharaoh and his men are charging after them. So when they saw him, they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to this desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. The same type of thing, the same voices that are coming in to Moses, these lies that are coming up. Leave us alone. It's not working. What's the point? Moses learned a lesson earlier on that gets played out because God prepared him then for a lesson for an experience that he was going to have right here. And so here's what Moses does. Before he would go back to God and say, what's the point? Why did you do this? You're obviously not holding up your end of the deal, what I expected. But Moses, because of what he experienced in his discouragement, he now gets to answer the Israelites with this. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still." Moses, the same guy, the first time the elders and the Israelites come to him and say, "Leave us alone, stop," he gets discouraged because there's a gap between his expectations and his experience. But now, at one of the most crucial times of the Israelites' history, he's leading millions of people out, still wrestling through his insecurities of what if they don't listen. And he reaches this place where they want to rebel against him. They basically are wanting to return to Pharaoh and not die. And he looks at him and he says, "No. I've gone through discouragement. Here's what God says. Stand firm. Watch the Lord deliver you. I believe that God's going to deliver us. I'm not going to go into the traps of these lies that Satan wants to bombard us on a daily basis." I don't know what it looks like for you, but could it be that God's preparing you now in this season of discouragement for something later? I'm not taking anything away from the frustrations of your discouragement. I'm not taking anything away of the season that you're in, if you're in a season of discouragement, because it's real. But could it be that God's preparing you now for something later? Here's one of the things that I learned, and this is actually from Chris Amon, my boss. We were out of the office one day, and we both enjoy nature. Whenever we get a nice warm day in the fall, we would go out to a park and we would walk. And we would talk through life and we would talk through ministry. And so on one of these days, we were walking, and he taught me this lesson. The key to unlocking discouragement is thankfulness and praise. Because I get to look back. When I see my life and I look back and I see where God has shown up, I could be thankful. And I could see, you know what, God has a plan. I can look back and see where God has already provided for me. And that even though I don't see the next step ahead of me, I'll be able to believe that He has a plan. And so we get to have this key of unlocking discouragement through thankfulness and praise. One of the Psalms says this, Psalm 104 says this, "Enter into His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise." When we enter into God's presence, we can be thankful and we can have praise because we get to look back and we get to see what He's done and how He's provided. The Apostle Paul, one of the guys who was basically what we would consider a modern-day terrorist who wanted to just kill and persecute Christians, he had his life change and he got to look back during a crucial point where he could have easily been discouraged, when he's expecting to have people come to know Christ and he's told to go out and share his faith. When he's doing that, he's thrown into prison, he's beaten. And in Acts 16:25, we read this, that him and his buddy Silas basically just did that. They're preaching and they're saying, okay, we're expecting God to show up. They get thrown into prison. And what they do in prison that day is they pray and they start singing praises to God. Men and people just like us, who just like us have everyday issues, everyday struggles. They probably have some of the same pressures we have of what if they don't listen? We have these fears. And we're in a season of discouragement of it's not working. What's the point? We reach the place of asking that question, what's the point? Does it even matter? And they show us that the key to unlocking discouragement is through thankfulness and praise, because what that does is that allows me to look back and remember where God has brought me. And then that forces me to believe that He has a plan and that He will provide. He may have us in a season for a period of time because He wants us to learn a lesson. He may have us in a season of discouragement because He needs us there for a specific reason, because one day we might be able to look back and tell someone else, I've been there. I've been in that season of discouragement. Guess what? There's hope. When discouragement is full bloom, there is a sense of no hope. It's not going to get better. It's never going to get better. Why in the world do you keep trying? And with an attitude of thankfulness and praise, we get to almost shut that down and say, no, there is hope. So that's been something that's been huge in my life over this past year. And we get to look at our life of, where are you discouraged? I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know if it's a conversation that you keep having over and over with a friend. Hey, why don't you come check out church? They keep rejecting it. I don't know if it's a season of discouragement where you're trying to influence your family and you feel like you're just hitting a brick wall and no one's listening. It's not changing. What's the point? Maybe it's a season of discouragement because you literally don't know what to do. You have decisions to be made, and there's timelines on those decisions, and in a sense, you have no clarity. Maybe you're in a position where you get to lead and you get to share and influence others, and you feel like it's not working. No one's changing, no one's following. I don't know what it looks like for you, but for me, it felt like that. What's the point? Why continue on? There's a gap between what I expected and what I'm experiencing. And Moses went through this process of seeing his expectations not line up with his experience. And he finally reaches a place of saying, you know what? No, I believe, because right after he says this, God shows up and he says, Moses, lead the people. I'll make the way. Don't worry about it. Just start going. He supernaturally has the water separated, and the Israelites walk right through, being freed from the Egyptians. God closes the water on the Egyptians. The promise is true. They're no longer going to see them. And what they do immediately after is they get to look back. They get to look back. What did God just do? Yeah, we saw the miracles while we were in Egypt, but it wasn't working. We finally got out to this place of freedom, and then Pharaoh showed up with his troops, and then God showed up. And the whole chapter of Exodus 15, immediately after they get through this, they have a whole chapter where they sing praises to God. They look back and they remember. In the midst of this gap of what I'm expecting and experiencing, there is a decision to be made where God has promised me I can. Why does this matter for you? Why does this matter for me? We look back at Romans chapter 12, too, and this has kind of been the verse that's been through this whole series. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Why is that such a big deal? Because when we don't confront these lies, when we don't fight, we don't confront these lies, then our callings are never fulfilled. What God's called you to do, to be a parent, to be a spouse, to be a sibling, if we don't confront these lies of insecurities or fears or these lies of discouragement, our callings are never fulfilled. And God's saying, I want something better for you. And you can't just throw your hands up and say, all right, God, show up. He's actually saying, no, this is a fight that you can do. And these are the I cans. God says this, basically, I can. I have given you the power. You have been set apart. Those of us that would say, you know what, we have decided to follow Christ, that we believe that he came for a specific reason, and that was to pay for my sins and to be able to give me a way out. Not just a way out where I'm in heaven, but to give me a way to have life and life to the fullest. He tells us about our enemy in John 10:10. He wants to come and he wants to steal. He wants to steal your joy. He wants to steal your hope. He wants to kill you and he wants to destroy you. He wants to destroy your life. He wants to destroy your family. He wants everything that he can do to keep you from accurately and actively hearing God's voice. And God's saying, guys, come on. I've given it to you. Look at what I say you are. You are chosen. You are dearly loved. You are forgiven. You are redeemed. Check this out. When the fears show up, look, dive to the bottom of that fear, and you're going to find me there. If you build your house on the rock, basically, if you build your life on the foundation of my word and my truth, guess what? When those fears come up, it might be hard. It might be inconvenient. It might cause you to go and get a second job, but guess what? I'll be there. I'll get you through. And when discouragement comes, don't throw your hands up. Guess what? You can. And here's the I cans. I can be grateful. I can be grateful. You know what God started teaching me, especially as Charlie started reminding me that he has me in this place for a reason? I started having an attitude change from kind of like resentment and entitlement to this attitude of gratefulness. So I got to look and be like, wow, God is so good, because I was searching for another job for a long time. And all I was thinking in my mind, all I was expecting was a minimum wage job. And I had no idea if they're going to be flexible with hours. But what God provided, he gave me a job that paid more than minimum wage. He gave me a job that was super flexible with my hours at church. He gave me a boss who allowed me to call off when I needed to call off. When I had church, when I had conflicts with the church schedule and this other job, my boss at this other job would allow me to make the right decision and go work and be at the church events. I looked and I go, wow, I was stuck in this between a rock and a hard place of not being able to provide, being able to go get an apartment, and so I'm kind of stuck, and God provided a guy at the church to be able to offer you housing for a really, really cheap rate. Wow, God, you actually gave me family who loves me enough not to just send me the text and the pictures of, hey, here's the new baby, because they want to rub it in my face that I'm not there. No, they gave me a family who wanted me to partake in it, knowing that I couldn't be there. It was all in my way of thinking. I started believing the lies that, you know what, it's not working, what's the point? So I can be grateful. God says I can be grateful. Here's what else God says. God says I can believe that he has a plan. We read this in Romans, that God will work all things together for good for those who love him. So in the midst of discouragement, I may not see why I'm there, but I can believe that he has a plan. I can believe that God is going to take me to a place, and he's needing me to go through this right now. Here's the last thing that I can believe. God says I can. You know what? I can look back and I can remember where God has brought me. When I look at my life and I don't know what the next step is, I'm kind of in this fog. Why in the world is this happening? What's the point? I can look back and say, well, God has brought me this far. He's not up there scratching his head, thinking, man, I wonder what Keith's going to do. He's looking, saying, wow, I've brought Keith this far, and I can't wait for him to realize that I'll be there and that he can trust me. What does that look like for you? In your life, in your situation, in your season of discouragement, what does that look like for you? And then what does that look like for us? Imagine if we're a group of people who got to be able to accurately and actively hear God's voice. Because when the chatterboxes come, when those lies come, imagine if we were able to confront them. We were able to locate those insecurities. We were able to play out our fears. And when discouragement came, we believed that God had a plan and we could get through it. This isn't like a self-help talk, but if we could literally confront those lies, imagine what that would do to us. No longer would we be living a life kind of in fear and uncertainty, but we would be able to have a life where we get to trust a God, and we can look back to his faithfulness over and over again. We can look to a God who has called us out, who has paid a price for us that we can live with him, and that he has made a way for us to live life to the fullest. He has given us incredible freedom. And in that freedom, he's basically just asking, will you trust me? Will you trust me? And will you trust me that when you try and confront those lies that I'm going to be there? Imagine what that would do for us. Imagine the way that you parent. Imagine the way that you're a sibling or a spouse. Imagine the way that you get to be a friend to those who are hurting. Imagine the way that that would mean for you as you're in work. All of those questions, what's the point? It's not even working. Imagine what that would do. That you would have a confidence in the God, the one who has promised you freedom, the one who's promised the Israelites freedom. We could look back and say, wow, he showed up. If he showed up for them, and he showed up for Moses, a leader of millions of people, he can show up for me. I can believe that he's a God who has my best interest in mind. It's been a tremendous blast of being here. Seriously, it's been so great. I want to just pray and give this over to God, because I want us to be able to be people where we can live in freedom, and that we can live as a group of people where we can depend on God. So I just want to pray for you as my friends, and then I'll hand it back over. God, thanks so much for your word. God, thanks for real examples of real people who went through seasons just like we're going through. God, whether it's through a season of wrestling with the lies of our insecurities, or a season of fears, God, not knowing what's going to happen, to God being in a season of discouragement. God, I pray for my friends, that they would be able to trust in you, God, that they would be able to preload your truth so when those lies come up, we can confront them. God, I pray that you would be with even the leaders, that they would be able to continue leading with confidence that you are the one who's guiding this church. God, thanks for them, and thanks for the time that I had to be with them. In Jesus' name, amen.